This is Matthew of Another World Terraria, where I teach and inspire you on the topics of rare plants and artistic nature displays. In this video, I'll be unboxing some awesome miniature plants, including several rare ferns and a few carnivorous sundews. This fern was sold as Pyrrosia lanceolata, and there's a pretty good chance that that's the correct ID, but there are over 100 species in that genus, and they often have variable frond shapes depending on the locale and the growing conditions. For that reason, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the Pyrrosia in the hobby are misidentified. This one's native to Africa, Asia, and Australia, where it grows on trees as an epiphyte and on rocks as a lithophyte. The fronds are somewhat thick and kind of hard and waxy, and they're covered all over the entire surface with very tiny scaly hairs, which is pretty typical for the genus. The fronds that you see here on the plant are the sterile fronds, which means that they don't bear spore, but the spore-bearing fronds, which are known as the fertile fronds, will be a lot longer and thinner. That's consistent with most other ferns, which also have sterile fronds and fertile fronds that are heterophyllous, which means that they look different from each other, often in size and shape. I'm guessing this one will probably stay about the same size that you see here as far as the frond size, maybe a little bit larger, and the fertile fronds will probably be around 6 to 7 inches long. This one was sold as Pyrrosia piloselloides. I find it interesting that most of the in situ photos of this species that I can find online show rounded, aka orbiculate fronds that are flatter, and they tend to hug the surface that they're growing on. I really like those plants because they have kind of a scale-like appearance, and I'd be super stoked if this one somehow developed that morphology. One of the things that I am really curious about is how plants vary in appearance depending on whether they're grown in culture or if they're found in the wild. In this case, I'm wondering if the variation in the frond shape is due to environmental conditions, which would technically be phenotypic plasticity, or if they're distinct forms that are conspecific within the species. Pyrrosia piloselloides is native to Southeast Asia, where it grows just like the other species that we looked at as an epiphyte and a lithophyte. This one has elliptical, aka oval-shaped fronds, and they're fleshy feeling with a waxy texture and are covered with scaly hairs. I should note that this species is often confused with a completely different plant called Lemophyllum microphyllum. The main difference that you can use to tell them apart is that the Lemophyllum has smooth fronds without any hairs on them. This one could potentially get fronds just a little bit larger than what you see here, especially if any conditions cause it to, for some reason, have flatter leaves, which are less succulent. Also, the same as the lanceolata that we looked at a minute ago, this one will get fertile fronds that are larger than what you see here. This one goes by a really great name. It's Philodendron mini Midget. I'm really excited to get this one because I've been wanting it for a long time. This one was supposedly discovered in the back corner of a plant nursery where it was probably overlooked because it's small and not really flashy. As far as I know, nobody has a positive ID on this one or has any information about where it comes from. It could be a true species, or maybe it's just a naturally occurring hybrid. I'd say mini midget's a pretty good name for this one because it's a small plant with leaves just about 3 inches long, including the petiole. The leaves have an extremely lanceolate shape, and the stem is actually surprisingly stiff and sturdy for the size of the plant. I think what I like most about this one is that the small size and the unique shape of the leaves make it look really cute. There's a small possibility that given time and space, the leaves could maybe get a little bigger and change shape, similar to a lot of other vining plants in the wild, like Microgramma and so forth, but I'm guessing in culture this one probably won't get much larger than what you see here. This tiny fern was sold to me as Microgramma species Ecuador 1A. There are a lot of Microgramma species that look very similar to each other, and their fronds can be variable depending on the conditions, so it's really hard to positively ID them. There's also a pretty good possibility that there are some Microgramma species that haven't been discovered yet. This one's from Ecuador, where it probably grows pretty much everywhere in the forest on trees and rocks. I really love this fern because of how tiny it is, and it also has attractive shape and color to the fronds as well as hairs that add interest. I have another species of Microgramma that looks very similar, but they're definitely different species. This one probably won't get any larger than what you see here. This was sold as Epipremnum Pincushion, with the word Pincushion being possibly a hybrid or a cultivar name. As far as I'm concerned, the ID's up in the air on this one because it seems to go by a number of names in the hobby, including Epipremnum Pincushion, Philodendron Pincushion, and Philodendron Mini Red. Whatever it is, I think it's a really cool mini plant with attractive foliage. I'm a bit surprised that the leaves are somewhat firm and waxy, and overall the plant's more stiff than expected. Obviously, aside from the small size, one of the main points of interest is the color of the leaves. I'm not really sure how large this plant could get, given a lot of time and space to grow, but based on what I've seen online, it probably won't get much larger than about 6 inches. This is Drosera microscapa, which is considered a pygmy Drosera, and it's also one of the small species in the genus. As with most other pygmy Drosera, it's native to Western Australia. I had this species before, but it died off, so I decided to get it again because I love how tiny it is. By the way, you can check out my plant tour part 3 to see a bunch of other Drosera, including a ton of pygmy species. As you can see, Drosera microscapa grows as a tiny rosette with almost microscopic leaves. Just like other Drosera, the leaves are covered in glandular hairs which exude a sticky substance that catches insects, and then the plants can digest that for nutrients. Believe it or not, the plants that you see here are fully grown mature specimens. This species gets super tiny white flowers. This is Drosera helodes, another pygmy species. Most of the info for this one is the same as what I just talked about for Drosera microscapa. I really like how this one tends to be more greenish and pale in color with not as much red as many of the other pygmy Drosera species. This is Drosera burmannii, which is a somewhat small sundew species. It's one of my favorites in the genus, so I'm excited to finally get it. This one is found in a lot of places from Asia to Australia. This species can vary in appearance quite a bit depending on the conditions and how much it's fed. The color can vary from green to red to pink, and the size can be 3/4 of an inch up to about 1.5 inches. If you check out some photos online for this one, you can see that the shape of the leaves and the overall rosette can also vary. Sometimes it's a little bit more open with rounded leaves, and sometimes it's a very tight disc with angular spatulate leaves that are tightly packed next to each other, which looks absolutely incredible. I'm guessing that the one I got here was probably grown in low light due to how green it is. I'm going to put it in bright light and hopefully get it to color up a bit and get some pink and red hues. In case you're wondering, I purchased these plants from a company called My Green Obsession. The owner's a super nice guy who's a pleasure to do business with, and both times that I ordered from him, I've been really happy with everything, so I would definitely recommend that company as a great source of plants. If you loved this video and are hungry for more, you can check out my plant unboxing playlist.